Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual afternoon with Rena Rosner to discuss The Light of the Midnight Stars. Rena Rosner hails from Miami Beach, Florida. She is a graduate of the Johns Hopkins University Writing Seminars program and holds an MA in History from McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Her debut novel, The Sisters of the Winter Wood, was listed as one of the 100 best books of the year by Publishers Weekly. She currently lives in Israel with her husband, 5 children, and a pug, where she works as a literary agent. Her grandparents and great-grandparents are from Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, Hungary, and Romania, and their stories inspire her work. To moderate this afternoon's conversation, we're joined by Sarah Beth Durst. Sarah is the author of over 20 fantasy books for adults, teens, and kids, including the Queens of Renthia series, Drink, Slay, Love, and Spark. She has won an American Library Association Alex Award and has been a finalist for the Andre Norton Nebula Award 3 times. She lives in Stony Brook, New York, with her husband, her children, and her ill-mannered cat. Throughout this afternoon's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of The Light of the Midnight Stars or any other book you might need from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest to the virtual stage. Welcome.
We're here.
We're here.
Hi, Rena. Thank you so much, Books and Books, for having us. And thank you, everyone, for coming and listening. I have been so excited to come and talk with you today, Rena, and show off your gorgeous book.
Yay.
This one's mine.
Yes, I was going to say, I could show yours. I have yours over here.
We just both hold each other's books up. First, I want everyone to notice how well matched Rena is with her book, like the blue.
Oh, yes. Okay, now I have to
pull that up because that's amazing. You match. Also, your author photo matches your cover art like perfectly. Did you plan that?
I know, and I took that photo for the first book.
It's like they knew that. They looked at it and this is our mood board for this book.
Right? Yeah. Well, I actually wanted to say, before we started, I first just wanted to say about Books and Books, the fact I'm so happy to be hosted at this event by Books and Books because I used to work at Books and Books a million years ago when I was in high school. Mitch Kaplan gave me my first job. I was 14 and miserable in high school. And the bookstore was my sanctuary. I used to work at the old location on Lincoln Road. And I showed Sarah this before. I found a picture of me working at Books and Books. I have no idea who the person is next to me here. I'll cut her out. But anyway, and actually my dog's name is Pablo Picasso Neruda. And the reason my dog's named that is because when I used to work at Books and Books, there was this Russian Bear Cafe at the old Books and Books. And there was a man who used to come in with this pug named Picasso every morning. He would sit at the Russian Bear Cafe and put his pug up on the chair next to him. And his pug would have like a bowl of water and he would have his like cappuccino. And I was like, if I ever have a pug, I'm going to name him Picasso. And that's because of Books and Books. So.
I'm the worst at naming cats. Actually, when I was growing up, I had 2 cats named Fluffy. In my defense,
Fluffy 1 and Fluffy 2.
Yeah, they were Fluffy 1 and Fluffy 2. Yeah.
Anyway, so yay, support independent books, and you can definitely buy my book and Sarah Beth Durst's book at the link below. Well, I think it just links to mine, but buy Sarah's book too. 2 for the price of 1.
Serena, I think we should start. Can you give just a brief, what's your book? In case anybody out there hasn't read it yet.
So my book's kind of like, it's hard to encapsulate in an elevator pitch, which is terrible that I don't really have one yet. But there was a school library journal review that was a starred review that came out like a few weeks ago. And it said something like, it's about dragon riding rabbis and their fire breathing daughters. And I was like, well, that's a rather awesome way to put it. So there's a little bit of that in my book. it's also about a rabbi who has 3 daughters. Each of them have different magical abilities that they can trace all the way back to the lineage of like King Solomon himself. Sort of like we think of the being a high priest, like a Kohan or a Levite, in that people can genetically sort of, they know they're from that lineage. So it wasn't too far a jump for me to think that there might be some sort of magical lineage that people might have. And it's about a terrible tragedy that happens to them and sort of how they're transformed by what happens. Yeah, and there are dragons. There might be dragons.
Awesome. Yeah, I read it last weekend. I just have to gush at you for a second because it is absolutely gorgeous. Your sentences, Reina, are so beautiful. There's this music to your prose that gives it this extra layer of depth that makes it feel like it's this timeless classic story that belongs out in the world. It's just gorgeous. You made so many beautiful decisions in how to tell the story, how to weave the many different pieces. It's very much a tapestry kind of story where you've got history and myth and folklore and magic and real life and real feelings and real family all woven together just so beautifully. It's just such a gorgeous, tragic, beautiful book. Congratulations. It's awesome.
Thank you. I have to say also, like, the publisher did an unbelievable job. Like, it's not just, it's like beautiful inside and out. Like, besides like gorgeous pages like this, they also have like little foxes in different places, and they're like stars that separate sections from other sections. They just, and like a candlestick. They just did a beautiful job.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see here, but I have to gush at whoever did your typesetting, because they changed the font style between the scenes that are from the point of view of the 3 girls and the interstitial moments that are between it. It's a different font type.
Crazy. It was
total nerd about how things are laid out.
No, they did a really beautiful job. It's like a beautiful book.
Yes, which I think reflects the words that you're using to tell the story. I mean, the art of the book itself matches the art that's in your story, and it's really pretty. And you guys out there that are listening, it's beautiful. You should read it. You're gonna love it.
Thank you. But I want you to talk about your book too a little bit, even though I know this is like about my book. We're supposed to be, but Sarah and I are good friends, and we're just excited to talk to each other about fantasy and world building and magic and all sorts of stuff. And your book came out like 2 months ago. Like, it's also pretty new.
Yeah, it's really new. Yeah, so this one's mine here. Liquidori holding it up. It's called The Bone Maker, and it's a standalone epic fantasy about second chances and a lot of bone magic. It's about these 5 former heroes 25 years after they saved the world. They think their story is done, and it's emphatically not done. But they're not the heroes that they once were. So that's what that's about.
And it's also really funny. Like, you've built this amazing fantasy world. It's a completely different world to our own. And the bone magic is so interesting. There's a lot of different types of bone magic. But your characters are also, they're just funny. It's like you'd want to like hang out with them in a bar, I found. Like, that was a really interesting new level for me from like knowing your work from other books that you've written, which were passionate and wonderful. And there was a moment that I even cried in this book. So it has that, but it also has like a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun in it.
I had fun writing it. I love writing snark. It's all about these friendships that have frayed and time has passed. So I wanted that like banter and the snark back and forth. So it was
great.
So when we talk about magic, I want to dive into magic.
Yes, I want to talk about magic.
So your book is so rooted in history. It could have been written as a pure historical novel, but you chose to weave in all this magic and add this extra layer that I think took it really to the next level. But I want to ask why. Why did you choose magic? Why fantasy as the element that ties the story together?
It took me a really long time to be able to write fantasy because I think that I had so much of this holy respect for those that came before me. I've been reading fantasy since I was old enough to read fantasy. And I remember going to Books and Books to the fantasy section, the adult fantasy section, and buying like Jane Yolen's Briar Rose, and Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling did this whole series about,
I love that.
you know, the fairy tale retellings, like Tamlin by Pamela Dean. And
Mhm.
there were all these books.
Right
I was obsessed. And those all came out in the early 90s, just in those years that I was working at Books and Books. And also because there was really no YA section. The only person who was sort of in that space was Tamora Pierce, like the Atlanta books, which of course I read, but those were almost more middle grade, you know, and that was it. You had to make the jump to adult fantasy at that point. Like, and so I think I just had so much holy respect for all those that came before me. I didn't know how to add my voice. And the first 2 books I wrote, which never saw the light of day, but had agents and like got close and went to acquisitions and whatever, had no fantasy in them. And then it was time. And I also didn't know like how was I going to add my voice? Like, what did I have to share that hadn't already been done by all these unbelievable fantasy writers who were out there? And then I realized what it was. And it was that I needed to bring fantasy back to sort of like Judaism. Like there were books like The Golem and the Genie, you know, that came out, but that was like one of the only ones. And I said, I'm uniquely placed to sort of, you know, read the sources in Hebrew and then in the native languages and translate them and use them and I have the background to be able to do that. And it was something that was really important to me. One of the interesting things that you and I were chatting about is that there's a lot of magic in Judaism, but the one thing that was forbidden was bone and blood magic, which is so interesting because it's literally your whole book. And I'm sure that there were people that might have experimented in that too, but it was like forbidden. But there's all this other stuff that's not forbidden. Like there were people who would pour oil on water and read the patterns of that. I think it's called lechonomancy. And then there's like geomancy. They would throw sand or throw rocks and read the patterns of those rocks. And there are like entire books written by rabbis, like treatises that have all this, how to do it and stuff like that. And it goes on and on. There's even like an old woman in the old city in Jerusalem here who supposedly like, or in like the area where Shtisel actually takes place, like in the Geula and Mea Shearim area, where she pours like hot lead into water and then reads the patterns of that. So like there's these remnants of stuff that's still there that like nobody really talks about. And so both of my books are an attempt to kind of like see what would happen if, you know, like to take stories that already exist and be like, but what if there was magic, you know? And in Sisters of the Winter Wood, it was like the story of a well-known story about a rabbi who would dance in a bear cloak, and in New Year's, oh, you have it too. And New Year's in Moldova, there's a tradition that people like dance in the new year in these big bear cloaks. And I was like, well, what's the difference between dancing in a bear cloak and becoming a bear? Like, it's just one leap further. And so in this book too, it was like, what's the difference between, there's this myth of the Solomonars, which is like a sort of Romanian myth, that there are these red-haired mountain men and women who ride cloud dragons in the skies and might be Jewish. They might be Khazar or red Jews. And sometimes it's used as like an anti-Semitic trope. And I was like, okay, but what if we had magic from King Solomon? What were the properties that he had? And how would that translate into like a magical legacy today? And so that's sort of like where it came from in this book. It's like, okay, this thing exists. Now let's make it magic, you know? And that's sort of like where it all came from. But along the way, there's like a million other things that got mixed in there, like men falling from the sky as stars and like people shifting into foxes and owls and, you know.
One of the beautiful things about this book is how organic the magic feels. Like it really does feel like it's woven into the lives of these characters. I mean, the family that's at the heart of it is the descendants of King Solomon. And it just feels natural that they would have these abilities, and it's woven into the culture and how they do everyday life, how they go about dealing with their garden, doing things at the home, dealing with the community and the problems facing the community. It's very interwoven. It's not like somebody stumbles across an amulet and they're like, woo, magic power, which is a great story too. I love those kind of stories. I want a magic amulet. I spent most of my childhood in the backyard behind my house searching for, you know, dragon's egg or magic amulet. So
Oh my gosh. I used to go to the pool and I would make like witch buckets. I would I would like stick all this stuff into like these like pails, you know, and be like, what can I concoct?
Yep. That's awesome. Yeah, sometimes I think I became a fantasy writer out of wish fulfillment, that I didn't find a dragon's egg, so I wrote one of my own.
Right. Totally. And how many times like magic would have like helped me or saved me in school when I was miserable. Like I said, miserable in school, and books saved my life. But like how many times I wished I'd had some of those abilities, I don't know, you know, to kind of get me out of like sticky situations or stick a pox on some people who, you know, constantly taunted me and stuff like that.
Right. I just want to ride one of your cloud dragons or something like that. Yeah. I spent a lot of time checking the back of my closet for a portal into Narnia.
Just in case.
Just in case. Right. Yeah, like way older than I should have been doing that.
I used to read by a sliver of the closet light and imagine that like one day that sliver would just like, open up into another world. But so how did you go about like finding or coming up with the bone magic? Because it works in so many different ways in your book, and it's just so interesting and different. And I could see all the amulets that you created, and like, it's so interesting. Where did the idea come from for you?
Well, the idea for Bones came about because I had scrawled like on a Post-it that I wanted to write about this silver-haired character with this long coat that had a lot of pockets. Because my pockets just don't even hold my iPhone. They're really pathetic pockets. I wanted a lot of pockets. And then I asked myself, okay, what's in these pockets? And my brain just immediately went, bones. That's just not my brain. So I grow it kind of in the way that you do. I mean, mine didn't grow out of anything historical, but it grew out of a decision to make. I wanted bone magic to exist. And then I just started asking questions and trying to grow it as organically as possible. If there was bone magic, how would it work? What are the rules? And I had decided that there are, the bones could be used in a couple different ways. You could have your bone wizards that create these talismans out of bones that imbue you with strength or stealth or whatever attribute the animal it came from had. Or you could have the bone makers, which the main character is, where you take a bone and you put it into this construct. So somebody would say it's not steampunk, it's more like bone punk. They create these constructions.
I love that.
And the third one is bone readers, where you can read the future by tossing the bones. And then I built it out of there. And the one kind of bone magic that is forbidden is you cannot use human bones. And that is punishable by death in this culture. So once I had those rules, I built the world out of it. So I don't think that's so dissimilar from your building it out of the historical records. You choose. Writing is so much about decisions, like which piece do you place.
Well, one of the things that's also important to me is that, like, I want it to work in the confines of like what we know about Jewish magic. And so like a lot of Jewish magic is spoken word magic. It's using Hebrew letter magic. It's speaking things into being magic. Rather than, like there were people who were herbalists and stuff like that, but the spoken word is an important part of like what happened. I mean, your book has that too, right? Like you have to speak something in order to activate. But in Judaism, it's really believed that like that what you say, it's connected to why prayer is so important and speaking to God so it was very important to me to think about decisions, like how do I activate the magic? How does it come about? It has to come from something that already exists in the culture and religion. Like I couldn't just, I could make stuff up, but I couldn't bend the rules so far that it wouldn't be realistic, even though it sounds ridiculous to talk about like realistic magic, but yeah.
That makes sense to me. Like, yeah, I love that. So how did you choose? So for your three characters, there's Hannah, Sarah, and Levana. How did you choose which magic would go with who?
So the easiest one was Levana because very early on in my research project, so the book started because my grandmother used to light candles in a closet. I don't remember it. My father remembers her doing this. And usually that's associated with like crypto Jews or conversos or Marranos, which is more the derogatory term. And that's more like Spanish and Portuguese Jews. And so I just assumed that I'd do a deep dive into my grandmother's heritage because nobody had really done too much genealogy about her. And I'd find Spanish and Portuguese roots, which totally makes sense. And I didn't. And that was almost more interesting. I discovered that she was from Romania via like Hungary or Slovakia, which was part of the Hungarian Empire then, but is now Slovakia. And there's Wallachia in there, which is like Romania. And all those borders shifted a lot in those times as Bulgaria in my novel, but so once I had that, and then once I had the fairy tale, which is Boys with Golden Stars, which is a Romanian fairy tale, I was like, okay, well, what else is in the landscape of Romanian mythology and folklore? Like, what other touchstones should I be looking at? And right away, like literally, if you Google like Romanian mythology and folklore, or you come across immediately the story of like Luceferal, which is like, and this is Zubaratul, like this star dragon, or this man who falls from the sky or falls like a comet, right? A star that falls from the sky and becomes a man. And young girls who become enthralled by this character, fall in love and wander the streets and like languishing for his attention, like not eating or drinking, just wanting the star to come to them again. And Mihai Eminescu, who's one of Romania's like poet laureate, or one of their most famous, well-known poets, has a whole like epic ballad saga about this princess who falls in love with a star. And so once I found that, I was like, okay, that's one of my characters, like done. And that like meshed with King Solomon, like that one of his powers was not just reading the pattern of the stars, but also had the ability to sort of control the stars or control the constellations, or change them or change fate. And so I was like, okay, so that was really easy. And then I started to look at like, okay, well, what else could King Solomon do? And so one of the things was definitely related to like animals. And another thing was like controlling the elements. And another thing was sort of like making things grow. Most often people think about King Solomon knowing the names of the animals. So I ended up kind of meshing two of them into one sister, which is Sarah, who sort of channels fire, but like also is part of like the strain of Solomonic magic, which would be like controlling the elements as well. But she also has a sort of like animal ability, like ability to speak to animals, to see to the heart of what an animal is. She sort of yearns for that. It takes her a while to get there. And then the third sister is about has the ability to make things grow and, to sort of like speed along the process of things growing and draw energy from the earth and stuff like that. But actually there are more things that King Solomon, like I could have gone further than that, but
Yeah, I love that moment when the pieces of ideas click together. Like there's a feeling like something in your head goes, yes, that's right. I felt like that when you're talking about Levana and the stars, that you must have had that click moment of, yes, this works. I'm writing this.
Right. Because it's Boys with Golden Stars. So there's like the fairy tale, and then stars, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's all coming together. And it happened with everything, but it happened with that first. And that was it was like not even a question. Like, do I want to write a book about a girl who falls in love with a man who falls from the sky as a star? Yes.
Yes. Definitely. Yeah, I love that there's this yes moment. So when you're approaching the book, do you outline? Do you not outline? What's your process?
I'm a terrible, terrible pantser. I outline nothing. I chaos. I did write one book, the first novel I ever wrote. I sat down like during NaNoWriMo and like started at the beginning and like did half the book during NaNoWriMo, and then it took me a year to do the rest of the book, but like would read the chapter before every day and then just keep going, just keep writing. But then like, life happened and kids happened, and like it was sort of like not possible to do that anymore. I do have like intense periods of time where I'll be like, okay, for 30 days, I'm going to write every day, but I have a hard time with like being a literary agent also and being a mom to 5 kids. And, to be able to do that every day is not really possible. So I sort of have like, I give myself pushes where I'm drafting, and then sometimes I've been able, once upon a time before Corona times, I would like tack on a week to like a trip to Bologna or London for the book fairs for work, or to America and go write somewhere for a weekend for 3 days, or for a week at Highlights, which has graciously hosted me more than once. And so that's great when I can sort of condense it. But beyond that, I write a scene when it comes to me. Like I have a scene in my head, I sit down, I write it. And Scrivener has been sort of life-changing. I don't know how you draft. I'd love to hear how you draft, but Scrivener, before I used to just write in Word, and I don't know how I ever did multiple points of view in Word, because like that was insane. The amount of like cutting and pasting I used to do. Now it's like I have a scene, I write the scene, and then in Scrivener, I can just move everything around like whenever I want to. And it's so much more convenient. And then when I get to the end of a draft, I like make files that I just call missing. And then I just like knock them off like one at a time to kind of like put everything together, like connect the places that like need to be connected and stuff. So that's how I've been sort of drafting now. But that could also change. Like every book is different, you know?
Change from book to book. Yeah, I find myself sometimes doing, book talks about this is how I write a book. And then I'm like, except for that one, I didn't do it. And not that one over there, but that one, I totally, well, except I got to.
Right? Because every book is different. Every book comes to you in a different way, I feel like,
It is. Yeah, I totally don't draft like you draft. I have to do it chronologically because I have to go through and feel what the character is feeling as they go through their arc. Otherwise, I don't know, I have to do it in order. And I do outline, not as extensively as some people outline. I definitely know some writers that have like this 50-page super detailed outline that they actually follow, which is amazing. I do not. I do an outline though, so I can feel like I have the shape, and then I completely give myself permission to ignore it whenever I want.
Right, because I feel like whenever I've been like, I'm going to write this scene next, I sit down and my characters do something completely different. And I'm like, okay, then.
Yes. Yeah, because when I first started writing, I thought that was just like a precious thing that writers would say, like, oh, the characters took over. And then they totally do. And
No,
they
they
eat
do.
my words. Because if you've drawn them right, then they have what their own wants and fears and desires and motivation and so forth. And if you try to violate the core of the character you've set out, you just hit a wall. So yeah. But
that's something that you, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I do want to talk about your characters because you managed to juggle 3 point-of-view characters and keep their voices distinct. How did that grow? Did you hear their voices from the beginning, or did you have to find them?
It took a lot of work. Lavanna, again, was the one who was the easiest. My only question kept being, should she be all in verse or not in verse? For those of you who maybe don't know, in my first book, Sisters of the Winter Wood, there's 2 sisters. One is in verse and one is in prose. And that's throughout. And then in this book, I was like sort of, my editor and publisher really wanted me to write a book in prose. You're so good. And so I was like, okay, but then Lavanna's voice just she kept drifting back into verse, and there are a million different versions, but her voice stayed the same. It was just like, how will her voice appear on the page that I wasn't sure about. And in the end, in this book, not spoiling anything, but she does sort of like, there are places where you see the impact of verse. There is like white space on the page, certain points and stuff like that.
So well, because it's where she is emotionally is reflected by, you're telling a story with the white space as well as the words.
Yeah. Which is what I love about poetry, right? Like, that's why poetry has something amazing about it. The pregnant pause, right? The breath. I love books that you turn a page and the next page is blank, and it like makes your heart plummet because it's like it's blank because the character is like devastated or something like that.
Yeah.
And I love those moments. And so it's important to me in like the world building and the word building, right? That there's like space left for those moments to happen where nothing is said, but so much happens. The other 2 characters, like I would say Sarah, like there are certain chapters that are untouched. Like I remember, like 2 years ago, I was at Highlights, and like there was a night that they asked us all to share. Highlights is a retreat center in the Poconos, which is wonderful, mostly for children's books. But they let like imposters in there like me sometimes.
They give each of the writers like their own little cabin, and it's wonderful. Like you're prancing around, it's beautiful.
It's really, and they give you everything you need. They feed you, and anybody, like you can, it's not like you have to be invited necessarily to go. They have like, you can book rooms and just go. You don't have to be a published author or anything like that. Anyway, so when I was at Highlights, one time. I read like one of the chapters of Linneman. My hands were like shaking when I was reading it because it was so early on in the book. And I'm like, so don't share any material when it's like, 30 pages long. That's the whole book. And like the first Sarah chapter is like verbatim that. Like, so I
Wow.
knew where I was going with her, but it took me a lot longer to find her voice because she's the only one that sort of doesn't rely on gimmicks. Like Lavanna is like this very airy, flighty, falls in love with a star. She has this sort of more poetic language and like, she's just so her. And then when I figured out that I wanted to do Hannah, like in journal form, her voice just sort of like, it was like she just came together, but Sarah, who I was so clear on in the beginning, the book is about her sort of finding herself more than any of the other sisters. She's the one who's sort of confused and unsure of herself and looking for herself in so many different ways. And I think it makes a lot of sense that it took me a while to kind of like find her and put her on the page, especially because like I said, there's no gimmicks. It's just her on the page. Like she's just prose, But what I love about your characters is that they all have such deep emotional arcs. And that was something I struggled with. One of my clients, Sophia Pasternak, who wrote Anya and the Dragon and Anya and the Nightingale, and she has another book coming out, middle grade, about dragons, Jewish dragons too, actually. She does this great series on YouTube that's like about character arcs, like mapping things we know about different personality types, like through her work as like she works as like a psychologist or to map that into like character development. And it was so helpful to me because I needed to figure out like, what are my characters' wounds and what are their motivations and what do they want? And what do they need? What drives them? Like that stuff I really had to hone and work on. But it feels to me like it's so natural in your book. Like every one of your characters has like a backstory and a tragedy and a motivation. Like, do your characters come to you first?
I think they probably do. I mean, I think I set up the concept of the world probably usually comes first. Like the bone magic, that bit was first. And then who would be most affected by it? I grew the characters out of asking myself that. And then once I had an idea of what shape the characters would be, like how many and that sort of thing, I start layering them their past. I try to think of them as whole people with histories. I don't base them on anybody real. I never base them on somebody I know because they have to exist as a real person to me in order for me to like them, write them. I need to fall in love with each of my characters before I can hear them. So I have to find, it doesn't mean they're all likable, but I have to find that thing, that spark in them that makes me want to hang out with them for the length of time it takes to write the book. So I find I actually can't begin the book till, the first sentence I wrote in this one, Kreia always wore her coat with many pockets when she went out to steal bones. Until I had that sentence, I couldn't write anything else.
Love it.
Like I need that
funny.
core of who they are, and then I'm good. So once I have
so
that
interesting.
core.
So I find that sometimes I have to get to the end of the book in order to be able to go back and then write the first line.
Yeah.
And that's happened to me more than once. That I've gotten with Sisters, that happened. I got to the end and then realized that I needed a chapter before the first chapter. And then that is like, and it has a great line. Like my first line in Sisters was second. If you want to know the history of a town, read the gravestones in its cemetery. But that chapter didn't happen until I got to the end. And then I realized like that I needed another chapter to start. And that sort of happened with this book too. I started with Sarah, where like I told you, like that was like, hasn't changed at all. It's like it's just after sunset and Sarah's talking. I can still see the bare oak branches black against the deepening blue of sky that make up the forest beyond Ternava's wall. And that was how I started the book. And then I realized that like I needed to wrap it with something. Like there needed to be a story within a story. And so now it's like there was a time when everyone knew about Trnava. Once it was the bustling market town that sat at the crossroads between the Kingdom of Poland and the rest of Bohemia. So it doesn't have the same sort of chilling, I guess, feeling, but it was very interesting to me. Like that both my books, I had to get to the end in order to figure out the beginning.
I've definitely written books where I've gotten to the end of 300 pages and gone, oh, that's what it's about. Okay, cool. So if anyone out there listening is writing a book, like my biggest advice is be kind to yourself. It doesn't come out perfect the first time, and that's totally fine. You just gotta get
or the
it
second
out.
time, or the fourth time, or the fifth time, or the eighth.
No,
And
yeah,
revision is your friend.
it
Even though, like,
it is. How many drafts do you tend to do?
I don't want to talk about it.
No, I do about
No.
30 per book. So
30? Wow.
Yeah.
No, okay. So I don't think I have 30. That makes me feel oddly better. I rewrote this book. I rewrote this book from the ground up, like I'd say about 10 times, but like literally like slash and burn and start again from the beginning. Like it was rough.
Sometimes it takes
and 10 is nothing though if you did 30.
Some of those were small. Like sometimes some of my passes I just go through and I'm like, all right, I'm going to fix the character's emotions.
Right.
Sometimes it's like, I'm going to lay the information I need in the right spot.
Right.
Like I try to not do all of it at once because it's too much.
Right.
One thread at a time.
So when I'm in revision, like with my editor, yeah, like I'll go back and she'll be like more spooky, creepy. And I'll be like, okay, we're gonna go to the beginning. We're gonna do the spooky, creepy all the way through. And then it's like, okay, now work on this character's development. And I start from the beginning. Okay, this character. But yeah, this book went through like 10 like slash and burn drafts. I told you the other day, there were like, I cut 70,000 words from this book at one point. Let's just say that most books are about 70,000 words. Like I cut a book from my book. It's there somewhere. I don't know if I'll ever do anything with it. That was crazy. And sort of started from the ground up again. I think though I was left with about 40 or 50. So it wasn't like, it was like, 10,000 words and I started all over again.
At the beginning.
But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of revision. It's a lot of, and I also like the epigraphs, like at the beginning of the different chapters. Like there's sort of like three sisters who speak in every sort of chapter, but then there's like an interlude where there's like this sort of two different epigraphs. One is this sort of overarching story that I read that starts the book, and then the other thing is this these epigraphs from the Book of the Solomonars, which is like a book that I wrote. That was a really fun thing. I have a really dear friend who's a rabbi and like does this podcast and like talks about Jewish history all the time. And so I would like call him at different times and be like, so what if I wrote my own holy book? Like, how would that go? And like, am I allowed to do that? Is that allowed? Like he's like, what, like the Book of Rina? And I'm like, well, no, I won't call it that, but like, I mean, but some of it
questions that are so weird to like random friends, and they're like, so if I did this, how would you feel about that? Like, you're talking about a story, right?
Right. But even other things like, so because my story has the historical element, I can't just make shit up. Like I do some stuff, but like, so one of the characters like is shuckling, which is like a word that I didn't realize was not an English word because I grew up with it so much. Apparently it's a Yiddish word, but I'm like shuckle, like buckle. That makes total sense that it's an English word. But it's like that. It's like the motion that like Jews do in prayer. Like they like rock back and forth when they pray. And so I called this friend of mine and I was like, okay, so talk to me about shuckling. How far can we date it back? Like how many hundreds of years have Jews been shuckling for? And if it's Yiddish, is that a term that was like invented? Like, did it exist pre-Yiddish? Because that was one of the most interesting things also about writing this book was like Sisters of the Winterwood is set in 1903 in a shtetl in, on the border of Moldova and Ukraine. And like, it's very, like there were first person testimonies I had, like I was working with maps. I actually found a map of like, like medieval Ternava, which was crazy and very helpful when I did find it. But, but there are many maps of like Dubasari, and that was a lot easier. This book, it was like, I kept on having to be like, but did this exist in 1360? And like, shuckling is a Yiddish word, and I had to deal with a world, whereas I dealt with like in Sisters of the Winterwood, there was Yiddish everywhere. Like everybody spoke Yiddish. Yiddish is a vital part of the book. In Lily and Midnight Stars, I'm dealing with a society that was pre-Yiddish. It's like Judaism in a shtetl-like environment, no Yiddish. So they would have only had sort of biblical Hebrew or Talmudic Hebrew. So I kept on having to think like, okay, were these things still customs in the 1300s? And so I attached myself onto this book of customs, which was written by Rabbi Isaac of Ternava, who lived actually 100 years after my book takes place. But it's the closest thing I could get to like, what were the customs of the Jews like, and what did they celebrate, and how did they celebrate? And the scariest part is how similar it is to a lot of our practices today. Like amazing, you know, but also
that it lingers, that you've got this connection to,
wow, you know. And so I based a lot of the Book of the Solomonars on that, but like with magic.
Magic makes everything better. So
that's the part I added.
How do you keep yourself from like falling down a research hole? Because there's so much that you could just chase after these little research bunnies forever. How do you say, okay, now I'm going to go write?
It sort of happens all along. Like, it's not something that's like, oh, I'm going to do all my research and then I'm going to write. You know, it's more like I'm going to have enough to start and then start writing these scenes and start building it. And then I do research as I go. And I love it. Like, the process of discovery is so much fun. Like I told you, like finding the star myth. And then at some point I had like letters between Mihai Eminescu and his lover, and they were going to be like in a library in manuscripts, and somebody was reading them and then discovered the poem. And sometimes you have to write your way into a story, right? Like, you're discovering all this stuff as you're doing research. And so it's very easy to be like, oh, so I'm going to have this character who's doing all this research too, you know? And then the whole thing got cut, right? By me, just like this is, but it was helpful to like imagine someone in a library doing this research, discovering this stuff, and like what's happening outside the walls of the library. Like, is somebody watching her, or like, are stars falling from the sky? And like, you know, so it's just something that's very integrated in like what I do all the time. And I will get stuck down a million rabbit holes, but I find them so fulfilling and so interesting. Like, one thing I was really working on in this book was trying to figure out where the forest would have been. Because it's clear, I found maps of like medieval Hungary and medieval Slovakia and where the woods were, but like, where's the town now in relation to the woods? And so many of these old ancient forests were razed to the ground, you know, and like, okay, if there was a forest and there was ancient growth in it, what would those trees have been? You know, so I asked a lot of questions like that, but I find that really fulfilling. Like, I love going down those. And with Google Translate, it's so easy to read texts that are like not in English and like in academic journals that are discussing like deforestation in medieval times. But it's interesting. I find it interesting.
It's fascinating. And I've always thought, like, when you're writing a fantasy novel, that you buy every bit of the impossible with every bit of the real that you put in. You know, the more real details that you can have, the greater the odds that the reader's going to come with you on the back of the dragon or whatever. So I love that.
Or to write a secondary world, right? You'd call your book a secondary
Yes.
so incredibly well that it feels real, even though obviously like we don't have these major like creepy crawly constructions that can scale walls that we use on a regular basis. But like,
yeah,
yes,
I mean, that's exactly how I approach doing these secondary worlds, is that I want these details that feel real, so that you'll be like, yes, of course, there's that rag doll made out of bones that's walking towards me. Cool, creepy, but cool.
I love those dolls.
Thank you. I had fun writing. Those were not in an outline. They just showed up and I'm like, you're staying.
Okay, there's a couple questions I want to jump to so that we get a chance to do them.
Yeah.
So we'll just go one by one, if that's
Okay.
okay. So how long did you work on the book? Do you want to answer first?
Yeah, like a year.
Because you write so many books. Like, how many books do you write in a year?
I write like 2 or 3 a year. I used to write slower. Like, so the thing I wish somebody had told me was that in a way it gets easier as you go along, because you learn your writing process. You know learn what works for you and what doesn't, and you try to not do the stuff that doesn't. So I've gotten a lot faster. And I think I've gotten better at it too. So it's a matter of months, about a year of working on it. How about you?
So this book was supposed to come out in November 2019.
Okay, so it took longer.
And it didn't. It was supposed to come out a year after my
You're
first
doing a
book.
lot of other stuff too, though. So there's that.
It had nothing to do with the pandemic. It had to do with, I may have turned my draft in on time, but it wasn't nearly anywhere near where the draft needed to be. And I think I may not. I think I actually didn't turn it in on time, to be honest. But I had been working on something else. And then my publisher was like, we want you to do another fairy tale retelling. And so I lost a guess like 6 months to a different book, which who knows if I'll ever go back to. But yeah, it was like this long process of writing and rewriting this book for a long time. And so, yeah, I guess from like my Sisters of the Winter Word came out September 2018. And then I was working on this before that, at least 6 months before that. So I'd say it was about a 2.5, 3 years-ish. That was a long time.
It varies for everybody because and there's no doing it wrong. Like everybody's process is
no, and I think there's a lot of pressure in the publishing industry to like put out a book a year, and like some people just can't do that. And it's not about like how many hours you work on it. It's just about the book like coming together in your head, and it just needs to take the time it takes. And that's one of the things that I think I've taken away from the process I went through with this book is that it's like I'm gonna write my next book, and like it'll come out when it comes out, and that's okay. And I'm just going to make it the best I can make it. And like, I don't want to push myself into a process that doesn't feel organic. And some people have a book a year, and some people have a book every 18 months, and some people have a book once in 10 years. And those are all okay, you know?
And different books take different amounts of time. I mean, some people ask me, like, my 500-page epic fantasy was quicker to write than my 200-page middle grade. It varies. So you just have to trust the story.
So they want to know if we have any kind of role in the cover development. So because I was working on this book for so long, my publisher at some point asked me like, okay, give us some ideas for the cover. And I was like, okay, these are the things that are going to be in the book no matter what. Strawberries, owls, foxes, stars. I was like, go. But then eventually, I think my cover designer was given like an earlier draft of the book to read and stuff like that. And then once they showed it to me, let's see if it's in here. This was like the original kind of like full frame of the cover. It's inside the book. And I just thought it was beautiful. I actually had no comments. I thought it was stunning. And then they ended up like only using, sort of like a part of it on the cover itself. But I had a lot of input, but like they just did an amazing job. With Sisters of the Winterwood, the one thing there was like a big yellow Jewish star here instead of the crown, and I loved the cover when I saw it, but I was like, no Jewish star on the book. Something felt very branded about it. It felt very Holocaust, and I was like, no. And so we changed it to this crown, which I love and is perfect for the book. What about you?
My publisher, I love this cover. They did a beautiful job. I think it's stunning. Yeah, they asked me for input, and I said I want bones, and so they gave me bones.
I love all the like intricate like carvings that you see on the bones too. Like it's so
I don't know if you see them. So that's part of it, that what the bone makers would carve into it, and the bone wizards. So I love that. Yeah, usually the author doesn't have a huge amount of say over the cover, but I've been really lucky that I love my covers and I love my publishers. They did a beautiful job. So.
Yeah. Okay. How do we know each other? Someone wants to know.
How did we meet?
I think we met at World Fantasy Con, not the last one, like a couple times ago. And we would just see each other. And you're so kind and generous with your time and friendly. You're not like, you don't have any cliques that you hang out with. You're just like open to talking and people and meeting anybody. It's really true though. And I think the first time I met you, you were like, maybe at least the first Queens of Renthia book was out. If not, maybe it was when that one was coming out. Take those out. I love those books.
Yeah, there we go.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm meeting the author of Queen of Blood. I love that book so much. And I think I didn't have any books out yet. But yeah, World Fantasy Con is, I think, the main place.
Yeah, we just hit it off and just started talking, and you're awesome. So I love hanging out and talking with you. So,
but we saw each other at the last World Fantasy Con that happened in person, as far as I know, I think, or maybe one of the last ones in LA.
Yeah. Right?
And we hung out a lot there.
Because I don't like leave the convention. So we totally got that.
You're like, where was that? Yes, it was in LA.
I don't know where it was. But I can picture the lobby. Like, I know what it looked like. And we were hanging out over there. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. But we'd hung out before then. Like, that was, yeah. So I don't remember which one. And then, okay, last question is there a book you've read that you wish you'd written? Oh my gosh. There's so many.
Right?
You know who constantly amazes me is Laini Taylor. Like Strange the Dreamer.
Beautiful.
How?
She's a
How?
wonderful
Like
writer. Yeah.
I want to be in her mind. I don't know how I read that. There's sometimes you read books and you're like, wow, I want to write that. And sometimes you read books and you're like, never in a million years could I write something that amazing. Like just the lyricism of the writing, but also like the blue people and the way, just like the stuff she comes up with. I don't understand.
I love her short story collection, Lips Touched Three Times. That's got, it's just got some musical. I love finding the music of language. I think you probably do too, judging from the music.
Yeah, absolutely.
A big deal for me is when you get the song of the story, and she has that in her writing.
Yeah, in spades. Yeah.
I think I'd use Tamara Pierce as mine because those books were so formative for me, and I think they really imprinted on this is what a story should feel like. So I think I go for. I actually dedicated my last book, Race the Sands, which is about monster racing. It's dedicated to Tamara Pierce. She had such an impact on what a good story is for me.
No,
I think
that's really cool.
Yeah, that's who I'd pick.
And I've been raving about. I read The Starless Sea recently also, and like I know that took Erin Morgenstern a really long time to write. Like it was like the follow-up to The Night Circus. Not that it's like a sequel or anything, but I know that I also like I've felt a lot of kinship to authors that took a long time to write their next book, even though like that's I think it was like 10 years or something. And I was like, you see, it only took me 3. But it's unbelievable. Like the connections that she makes in that book astounded me. Like the level of detail in every scene, that it's the kind of book you get to the end and you're like, okay, I need to start and read that all over again now that I understand what I'm reading. You know, that was also one.
Yeah. So how do you balance everything with writing and agenting and family and
I mean, the truth is my writing sort of suffers because like I love my job as an agent and that takes up most of my day. But when I'm in like writing mode, I used to write at night when my kids went to bed. Now my kids are teens and they don't go to bed. So I've started writing in the morning, like when they all leave the house. Like I get my kids off to school, I sit down with a cup of coffee and I give myself an hour or two. And also because like the US doesn't wake up until 4 p.m. my time.
Amazing.
So I sort of like have a whole day. I actually really love that. Like it's hard on Fridays where like I'm going into Shabbat when like America's waking up. And so I can't answer emails on Fridays, but like it's still a work day in America. And so that's when it's hard. But like most of the time, I love that I have all day, like I have until 4 p.m. to kind of like get all my like ducks in a row, figure out what I'm going to go on submission with, read, clean up my inbox. And then like 4 p.m. hits and yeah, I'm like dealing with my kids and whatever. But like I had the whole day to kind of prepare for what I was going to do like during US business hours. And so I also feel like I can give myself the mornings to write, you know? So that's when it's good. When things are good, that's like what I do. And when things are not good, I need to go to a cabin in the woods because there's no other way.
Fair enough. Yeah. No, I'm a write every day person and I have like zero separation between writing and life. I'm just like, whenever I'm near my computer, I am writing.
You're writing. Wow.
Pretty much punctuated by going to get something to eat and then I come back and writing. Sometimes I just bring the food right next to the computer. I have so many crumbs in my keyboard. It's just like
actually just happened to me. I have a laptop that was only like 3 years old and like the keyboard went like first the T stopped working. And so I was trying to figure out how to write things without the letter T and then the Y stopped working. And then I was like, I think I need a new computer because things you'd be surprised how many words have T's and Y's in them. It was not
I'm at my computer right now. The letters, like what they are, have rubbed off. Like they're all just blobs. So things I know how to touch type because you can't you can't read the letters on my laptop. But
the truth is, I think I'd go crazy if I only wrote. Like for me, like when I was on different maternity leaves, I would like start a jewelry baking business because I was like, I'm bored. My husband's it's like, you're supposed to just be nursing the baby. And I'm like, just nurse the baby? Like, that's it? Like, what else I have to like do 17 things at the same time? What do you mean just nurse the baby? And so like, I like having the balance of it all. Like I do sometimes wish I had more time to write, but I think that if I wrote full time, I'd probably spend a lot of time like playing solitaire.
I don't know about that. I was asking someone to be like, so what do you do when you're not writing? What are your hobbies? And I was like I like to eat. Pizza's really good. I had nothing. I was like,
And this is why you have 22 books out. You're incredible. You're like a machine. It's
what makes me
amazing.
happy.
I'm in
love
awe.
reading stories. Like it's just, I am happier when I'm writing. So and eating at the same time. That's
Well, you guys are amazing, but no crumbs on your keyboards, okay?
I know.
No more crumbs on the keyboard. But anyway, this has been a fantastic conversation. You know, one of our last in-person events was with Erin Morgenstern for that book.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
cool.
I remember that very fondly. So I hope that we're going to get to see both of you in person soon.
I hope so too.
Maybe in Miami for Miami Book Fair in November. I so hope. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. I want to thank both of you for being at Books and Books. I love the fact that Books and Books saved your life, Rena.
It's true.
That was such a beautiful story. I think it's meant a lot to a lot of people over the years. So thanks for that. Thanks to viewers watching from everywhere. I just want to remind you, you can buy both of these ladies' books by just hitting the green button on the bottom. It's linked to The Light of the Midnight Stars, but you can, there you go, The Bone Maker. But you can search for The Bone Maker and buy it on the website too, and we'll ship it right out to you. And if you're in Miami and you want to come by one of our stores, we're now open for safe shopping. And thank you. And we'll see you again. We'll keep selling the books at our bookstores, and we're really proud to have them and to have had you here this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe.
You too.
Okay, bye.